got a little thing in your top right corner that says it's recording.
Oh, yes, I see.
I'm practicing.
Okay. Are you just recording the audio or the video as well?
It will record both, and then I'll send you an MP4 file,
Okay.
and we can decide whether we're going to keep the recording that we make now,
Hmm.
or whether we're going to use this as a dry run and
Okay.
do it in a slightly more structured way.
Okay. How are you doing?
I'm all right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I thought it would be interesting not to talk about the things that you might usually sort of talk about when you're asked to perform as an academic,
Hmm.
but something that lies at the back of a lot of the things that's going on at the moment. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday, and she said that although she was used to spending time by herself, etc., etc., what was confounding about what's happening at the moment is that the way that we manage time is through relationality.
Mm.
And being a sociable person and having lots of relatives, etc., she said she'd become more sociable, but in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
I'm an orphan and I don't have anybody very much to be sociable with anymore. So I found myself sort of thinking, that's quite interesting, but I'm not experiencing what's happening now
Mm.
in quite that way. And then I was also thinking about you leaving Edinburgh and going off to London, and you're starting a job, but you're doing it in this sort of strange circumstance where the things that carry us forward, no matter what we might feel about universities and what's going on in them, the thing that carries us forward are the relationships we have with other people, with students, but also with colleagues. And here you are starting a new job in a situation in which the usual relationality
Mm.
is kind of suspended or fractured or
Yeah.
dislocated in some way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's been a very, very strange experience because of my inability to see people and therefore like cement the transition through hugs,
Yeah.
conversations, drinks, tears. Like I think it feels actually much harder to do those things when they're not in person, or when I have had very limited, at people's doorsteps dropping off bags of books, or like these final acts in Edinburgh of like practical, socially distant, is this necessary? You have to put these things somewhere, and not being able to hug people because that would
Mm.
obviously break the distancing. And it making it not feel very real, to be honest. I feel like this is just a very strange holiday I'm having in my new home. But yeah, I think I just started my new job yesterday. And I had met three of the people who I was on calls with yesterday in person at the interview,
All
but
right.
then spoke to someone today, who, we were having a digital coffee, get to know each other. And it went really well, but it feels different. And there's a slight awkwardness to the interaction because it's one that I've never had before. I normally would have those in person.
Well, normally we would have, like you and I know each other really quite well.
Yeah,
So we have these kinds of digital conversations on the basis of something.
yeah.
To start a relationship on the basis of the digital
Hmm.
is a whole different experience, I would guess. I mean, I've never. Oh, I have done it actually with somebody in the States.
Hmm.
But that was a very formal relationship. It wasn't a kind of everyday working with someone.
Yeah.
So was your digital using Skype or Zoom or what?
So it was using Microsoft Teams. So I've learned how to
Oh,
use that the
right.
last 2 days.
Oh,
um,
and what do you
which
think of Teams?
it's grand. Yeah, I actually find it all right. I think it's 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 interesting to use an instant messenger function with professional colleagues for the first time, because my way of using instant messenger like functions on different platforms is a lot more informal, and so I'm trying to work out if I need to formal up my language on that. But then actually, these are how we would have almost little sidebars in the office, or like a little laugh at the, I don't know, making coffee in the kitchen or something like that. That's how I'm imagining these interactions. So they're more informal. And then emails and then the Microsoft Teams video calls. So
Can you
yeah,
see yourself?
yeah.
And you know that well, I've never managed to see more than four people. It puts four faces on the screen, the
Hmm.
last four people to speak.
Okay, because the most people on the call so far has been four people. So yeah, I haven't experienced this. Okay, so then you can't see the people if they are
You get a
not
little
the last
block
four
at the
people.
bottom with their initials back to front,
Okay.
so it would be MO rather than
Yeah.
OM.
Uh-huh.
And because they're down the bottom of the screen, you don't get a sense of them being there, nodding or smiling,
Yeah.
or pulling faces, or throwing the cat off the table, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. I suppose I've been using Zoom for pub quizzes. My partner's been running pub quizzes in the evenings for friends, and so we've used Zoom for that with maybe sometimes six or seven or eight people on different screens. But you can have a lot more people on the Zoom
On
call
Zoom.
in small
Yeah.
boxes, yeah.
Mm.
But yeah, also we did start we got to know each other initially digitally via email, because I was on study abroad. So I think the first times we sort of met were via email, which
All
now
right.
feels very I mean it's a long time ago now, but it that is kind of that feels like a very different past. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yes.
Um, but
So you've gone from like a social isolation bubble in Edinburgh,
mhm.
in a strange corridor as it crept down the country in a sanitized way,
Yeah,
with people leaving you bags and not coming too close.
yeah,
And then you've arrived in a
in
similar
London.
situation in London.
Hmm. Yes, it's been quite strange. I think there were more people on the train than I thought there were going to be, but people were socially distancing. But yeah, it did feel quite bizarre and yeah, like I said earlier, like not very real. And especially because the things that I was excited about in terms of moving to London were about going out. Like I just can't wait to go out dancing after this is over and like be.
Probably it will be waiting a long time.
I know, yeah. I think I'm sort of slowly realizing that, but. Yeah, and I think those experiences of being around a lot of strangers, which I think sometimes can be quite anxiety inducing or just stressful or sometimes just annoying or functional. Now I'm kind of like craving some of those experiences, even just for the people watching. I'm sort of trying to work out what the equivalent people watching is when there's not that many people wandering about in public. Even when I go to the shops and I just want to get out of there as quickly as possible. So
What
yeah.
do you think would be the kind of differences, like building up a research? Well, let's take the example of research as you're in a research context. What do you think might be the long-term differences in conducting research relationships digitally?
Hmm.
I mean, do you think it would make them more formal or, more occasions rather than just bumping into someone and chatting or having a coffee?
Yeah, I suppose there has to be more intentionality behind the meeting because I think that unless you're no, actually maybe if I think about Twitter, so I'm on Twitter and I think that when you have an open profile, it functions as a very public space because anyone can kind of chime in, which is both sometimes a nightmare and then also can allow for these almost like serendipitous coming together of things or, someone jumping in and in a research context, providing a paper or giving a comment or providing a connection that you maybe hadn't thought of before. So I think like that space for me provides something akin to more serendipitous bumping into people or meeting or things like that. Um, but I think otherwise there has to be more intentionality, or maybe not. I suppose I find it more uncomfortable because I'm not used to it. Trying to make, Skype dates or Microsoft Teams or Zoom coffees because it feels more formal and even though it's actually quite similar to get it to arranging to meet for a coffee with someone. But I suppose it's more part of my job would have been to go to events and network with people and
Yes.
connect with different people and build,
How do you
trust
know?
and relationships. Yeah. And
You
I
can't
don't
just think
really know.
that person looks interesting, or I've heard
Yeah.
them say something to someone else, and I'll go and scrape an acquaintance with them.
Yeah.
What do you think will happen with teaching? I mean, research can be often pared down to, a relationship with three other people or a relationship with one other person and
Hmm.
building up from that. But what about, what I'm going to face in September, which is, 70 people on a course,
Hmm.
or for some of my colleagues, several hundred people.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean,
I think it sounds like a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. Like, I think with the teaching, I think that, the Open University have been running digital learning courses for years.
I take the practicalities for granted. I mean, the
Hmm.
content of a lot of Open University courses is frankly not that wonderful, but
Hmm.
they're dealing with a kind of like a lowest common denominator, very large group of students, and they've got an infrastructure to deal with that. So I take it, that there may be practical differences. I'm more interested in what it says about sociability and relationship.
Hmm.
The teaching relationship is an odd one, isn't it? Because you make contact with people,
Yeah.
you try and enthuse people, and a large, even in very large groups, several hundred people, you can catch the eye of people in it, and they look at you.
Yeah. I think especially trying to read the room. I know particularly having taught in maybe seminar groups of like 30 or 40 people where you're giving lectures, but to a small enough group of students that if you're also teaching them in tutorials or you do it over 10 weeks, then you get to know them quite well. And I think seeing people's facial expressions and responses to different things that you say, you can get a feeling for, do people find the material challenging, or does it bring up emotion, or do people look confused? And I suppose those kind of cues I probably underestimate, but they do inform if I provide further caveats to a point, if I'm giving a lecture or kind of ad lib in the moment because I'm feeling something in the room that maybe indicates that what I'm trying to explain hasn't fully got across to people in a way that I maybe hadn't anticipated. Whereas I've just finished filming some like video lectures for an online course. And I think that a lot of my informal examples, I find myself editing out because I wasn't sure how they would land,
Mm.
not in real time with the people there, because it's quite a different, or well, it's a lack of interaction with the audience if it's pre-recorded. Um, so yeah, I think that a lot of that sort of like informal moments that can be where some of the sense making really happens for people, especially if they're not getting it or if there's a sense that maybe the examples are not reaching them that you might be able to feel out in the moment. I think that probably ends up being lost. Um, but
Well, there are
even just,
also other things, aren't there, that what we've been talking about is the relationship between a person nominally in charge of a classroom and a group of people who are recipients of the
Mhm,
strange thing that we call teaching.
mhm,
But also what's going to be affected is so it will affect that relationship and will make it a very different kind of thing, I think. But it will also affect the relationship between student and student.
yeah,
I mean, there are going to be quite a lot of students who are going to have health problems. They won't be able to do face to face, even supposing it's available.
yeah,
That will affect their ability to build up collegial relationships with other students. That
mhm,
will have long-term consequences for their friendship network.
yeah. I think that is profound. Yeah, definitely with when I taught first year sociology, maybe the first year I was teaching, and I had three tutorial groups, and it was like watching a sort of experiment play out where the in one of them there was a friendly third year exchange student who asked everybody out for coffee after the first tutorial group, and in the other two that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the tutorial group that she was in, they were all much more comfortable. They had a lot more like crack with each other, or they were laughing, and there was a friendship between them, even if it was loose, they'd been out for coffee once and maybe a few of them kept going out for coffee. But it made a fundamental difference to the same material, the same tutor, and 10 students or 12 students. So I suppose that kind of stuff can't really happen, or it would happen in quite a different way. I think it's harder for the students to email people rather than informally say to people after class, do you want to, or even do you want to go have a coffee, or even they find themselves walking back to student halls together, especially with first years, or they bump into each other around the city. I know that I would have recognized a lot of people from around the city when I was an undergraduate at Edinburgh, and then when I saw them in class, there was a familiarity that made me feel slightly more comfortable with them. So I suppose that element becomes quite absent. Um,
Well, it becomes much more individualized, doesn't it? That it's the individual student and what they make of the materials they're presented with,
Yeah.
rather than a very complicated set of relationships
Mm.
that would add up in Norbert Elias's terms to a figuration.
Mm.
You know, the figuration that joins together teachers and taught, and the taught with each other, and how
Mm.
that perpetuates and shifts and changes over time,
Yeah.
varies depending upon people's degree structures and the courses that they take.
Yeah.
And kind of all of that messy complexity, which is the pattern of sociability that we have, gets stripped away.
Hmm.
And it becomes you and your reading materials. You know, in the old Open University days, delivered through the post, clunk on the doormat comes your course materials, and you work through units.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you post the units back, and once a year you go off to a summer school, get blind drunk, try and have sex as much as you can, and try and build up. You know, I
Yeah.
used to tutor on Open University courses, so I
Yeah.
speak from experience. I don't think they're like that anymore. I think they're much more sober businesses. In the 1970s and 80s, they were ripping good fun.
Yeah.
So people made up for the lack of sociality of
Hmm.
their individual learning experience at the summer schools.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, like if people sign up, if people opt in a fully informed way to that kind of learning experience, then it's a totally different kettle of fish
Yes,
to students who are expecting,
yes.
face-to-face teaching. And also, I suppose what obviously has now become a very interesting term, but like the student experience, obviously there are many ways in which that has become, I don't know, it means a lot of different things, and it relates to sort of audit culture and I don't know, marketization of universities. But if you just use it in a colloquial way of students wanting to have some sort of experience that's kind of been mythologized, that involves everything around the classroom and everything about being in that space, and even things like, I don't know, catching, in relation to learning, catching your lecturers after class and having a non-recorded informal conversation with them. Because I think one of the other aspects of this is that if all of the communications are written or recorded in some way, that I think that has a different feeling to it, and especially for students and staff who have some sense of cybersecurity, or like not wanting to necessarily put everything into written form.
But it puts the onus on other parts of people's lives.
Mhm.
I mean, once you let the cat out of the bag in terms of cumulative teaching, um, released on a week-on-week basis, you can have someone who will do the whole of a course on a day.
Yeah,
They,
yeah,
they can blitz through the materials, spend the rest of their time as a brain surgeon or a care worker or
yeah.
frontline worker in the NHS.
Hmm.
It shifts the kind of primary focus from the sets of relationships within the university context into other areas of people's lives.
Mm.
So I think we have to. I think it's sort of quite instructive to look to the Open University and other distance learning bodies,
Hmm.
and what kind of patterns of sociability and relationships people have. And basically, as I was saying, with the old model Open University,
Hmm.
people's relationships were primarily not within an educational setting.
Yeah. And I suppose that the difference is obviously between students who are going to a university within commutable distance to their home from before a university setting, or students who are moving into halls or moving somewhere for a degree and to go to that university. Like the experience is obviously going to be quite a lot more different if the students were intending to move into halls or move to a different place. But if you were intending to commute from a pre-existing home, then maybe that's more akin to
More
that
familiar,
experience.
yes,
Yeah. And
yes.
and I think that it is very important as well to think about the sense of escape or security or space that the university and university accommodation can provide for some students who might not have like safe or secure or home situations, where the anticipation of having a stable accommodation set out for them in relation to an institution might actually be an incredibly important space for their lives.
Before the lockdown, Edinburgh started doing that. It
Hmm.
started providing safe spaces in the library. It started providing on tap computer facilities for
Hmm.
people who would come into a safe space.
Hmm.
I think, there's going to have to be some wholesale rethinking of how space is used in a university,
Hmm.
and how these kinds of safe spaces can be constructed without bankrupting the university.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been talking a lot about the kind of relationships at a nitty-gritty level.
Hmm.
Are there other things that you've been thinking about that we haven't covered?
Um, I suppose, I mean, a lot of what I've just been thinking about is just being in spaces and bumping into people. And I think that comes out of obviously having been at Edinburgh for a long time and knowing a lot of people in a small space, so that if I was on campus or if I was around, my office, that I would have a lot of unexpected interactions with people, and that those really made my day, better in some ways, and then sometimes would be quite disruptive. And so I think there's been this interesting discussion around, some people saying, "Oh, isn't it great? I've got all this time, uninterrupted time to kind of get on with my book without distractions." And then other people thinking like I'm going mad without like seeing people or interacting with people.
Very few of the people who said that about I'm going to get on with my book and I'm going to do full books have actually done it, because
Yeah.
there are odd things that happen to the mind
Mm.
in this sort of curious now that we inhabit.
Hmm.
There is a before and there's a now, but kind of conceptualizing after
Mm.
is actually incredibly difficult.
Yeah. And especially, I think maintaining some sense of professionalism. I think I'm interested in how intimacy changes in these situations, because when you're interacting with people into their home through a video link, that gives off a lot of information about someone. And, even before starting this call, I was thinking, oh, can anything be seen in the background? Like what?
Nothing at all. I think that's really interesting. In the background, you could read the titles of my books.
Yeah.
Your background is just white. It's like you've got this little cubbyhole that you've painted a kind of glaze, a kind of very, very bright white, and there's no giveaway. Although I have looked, I have to say.
Yeah, this is the art gallery space in my home. Not really, but yeah, I mean it's been interesting seeing into people's home
Yeah.
situations and the things that people say. And actually, yesterday in this first meeting in my job, I was sitting on a deck chair that began to collapse as I was sitting in it, and I was trying to hold it together, thinking, am I going to tell them that my chair is collapsing, because that feels too ridiculous on a first day? And then I thought, I mean, she's in her bedroom. We're all in these bizarre situations. Why are we still maintaining this sort of facade of like professionalism? So I'm kind of interested in how that will continue, especially with students, where that professionalism carries within it sort of like slightly like hierarchical relationships and some ideas about what the teacher is or the professor is. And
Yes.
is it going to make people more sort of feel more accessible or more relatable,
Or
or
maybe
is it going to
not
take
getting
that shape?
such a good deal because the person who's teaching them is human.
Yeah, yeah, that as well. So
And has
I've been
got
thinking a
a dirty
little bit about
coffee
that.
cup and untidy hair, and
Yeah.
you know. So I think I think you're right about intimacy, but it also puts authority under the spotlight, doesn't it? Of how
Mm.
that if you're not in a very formal situation, how do you maintain, if you're the person who wants to, how do you maintain authority?
Yeah, yeah.
How do you get taken seriously?
Hmm. And especially if there's interruption. I've seen a lot of like, kids in the background of people's
Kamikaze
videos.
kids. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Yeah, interruptions, the kind of like get off the computer, I need to use it to Skype my teacher, or these sort of funny moments where it becomes a negotiation that is not usually forefronted in the workplace. And I think there's an element of that that is important and good, that we're seeing that invisibilized like household childcare, like schooling labor, but also it puts people with those caring responsibilities in sort of impossible situations, because I don't think you can homeschool your child properly while trying to do a full-time job and in a sort of makeshift home office. So I think even just the fraying of that on people's emotions, where people can't come fully fronted up, ready for work. And feel like I've seen more
Well,
emotion in
it
people.
also makes you think of other things historically. My maternal grandmother
Hmm.
was a herbalist.
Hmm.
She also had 14 children. I don't think she had any problems with these things. When my mother and my aunts have told me tales of their upbringing,
Hmm.
I think the expectation of how parents and children interact and how you and the resources that children have and what they're expected to do have changed very markedly. I mean, my Aunt May was at work when she was 12.
Yeah.
She wasn't whinging on about an iPad and, and I'm bored and when are we going to have lunch?
Hmm. Yeah. I think I feel like there's been I've seen some academics try and who have obviously some flexibility and time to be doing teaching differently with their kids and doing this much more like practical and engaged kind of stuff. But then also what I'm seeing is a sort of like social media presentation of that, which is obviously kind of
Yes,
a
but
particular presentation.
it raises sociality and the relationship between parents and children.
Hmm.
It's sort of interesting to think how that might change when parents have been used to other people doing a large part of the parenting
Yeah, yeah.
and they do the peak moments. Having a child for all the time, whilst
Mm,
also trying to do other things when people don't have sort of customary ways of handling that.
mm,
I think parents have to learn, and probably learning, as we speak, very, very quickly, how to have new kinds of parenting skills.
yeah. I mean, I suppose it kind of shows how I don't know, like I'm interested in if there are parents who have not done large parts of the caring responsibilities, especially if there's like very divided divisions of labor in the
Yeah.
household, they're being sort of forced to witness that. And obviously, wondering how the gender division of labor in the household, how persistent that is, I presume quite persistent. But I think that will be quite interesting because people kind of can't get away from that. I mean, it's interesting for me who doesn't have to experience it. I'm sure it's an absolute nightmare if you are unable to like manage that, which yeah, I think is quite probable. But I suppose that there will be parents who will see the full scale and array of what the parenting looks like if they maybe have not had to do that before. um but yeah, I think that that is interesting in how it disrupts the sort of professional front and then the backstage family private life and sort of household reproductive labor that people might be
Yeah.
doing. They kind of throw them
Everybody's
together.
learning how to have relationships with each other in a very different kind of way. I mean, it's like everything has been thrown up into the air at once.
Yeah,
Though from the outside, you see very little. There are no people around. No, it's all happening
yeah,
in the household context. I
yeah.
think this is maybe the point at which we should stop. We've mentioned various sociological names, but mainly we've been talking about the experiences that we've had and the kinds of thoughts that we've had on it. I mean, if
Mhm.
you have any other thoughts about it, we can. I'll send you this MP3, MP4 file, and we can think about whether there's anything to add, or whether we could do it again and shorten it, or
Mhm.
whether it's good to go as it is. But I think it's been an interesting conversation and raised lots of interesting points.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.